Liam Vance stood on the perfectly manicured lawn of his backyard, the scent of fresh-cut Bermuda grass failing to mask the acrid smell of chlorine and ozone. He wore industrial-grade ear protection, but the rhythmic, agonizing ka-thump of the commercial pump still vibrated through the soles of his shoes. It sounded like the beating heart of something dying. Below him, the vast, shimmering expanse of his 20-foot, custom-designed saltwater pool was receding. It was draining fast, revealing the sickly green tide marks on the fiberglass lining, the sunken mosaics of dolphins that now looked like ancient ruins being exposed to air for the first time in a decade. The pool was his peace. It was his $60,000 investment in summer tranquility, the silent turquoise jewel that had made the last decade of long hours at the investment firm worthwhile. He had paid for the tranquility, but the price, it turned out, was never quite settled. The problem wasn't the pool itself. The problem was Brenda Jenkins. Brenda, who lived 3 houses down on Willow Lane, was the epicenter of entitlement in the neighborhood. She didn't have a pool, but her 3 children, aged 7, 9, and 12, had, in her view, a constitutional right to use Liam's. It had started innocuously 2 summers ago. A polite knock, a request to use the bathroom, a quick 5 minutes. Liam, being a decent neighbor, agreed. The 5 minutes became an hour. The hour became every afternoon. The polite knock became a casual climb over his 6-foot cedar fence. He had tried everything. First, the soft approach. "Brenda, I really need some quiet time this week. Could the kids use the pool on weekends only?" Brenda smiled patronizingly and said, "Oh, Liam, you know how kids are. They need to burn off energy. It's just so hot." Then, the firm approach, he changed the lock on the gate and put up a private property sign. The next day, he found the 9-year-old, Leo, attempting to climb the fence using his expensive antique wrought iron trellis as a ladder. The trellis was bent. The escalation was relentless. 2 weeks ago, the final straw. Liam had been hosting a crucial, confidential video conference call on his screened-in porch. The sounds were muted, but not muted enough to hide the splash-screaming splash that started precisely at the moment the CEO joined the call. He sprinted outside to find Leo and his older sister, Chloe, not just in the pool, but on his custom-built floating cocktail bar, using the ice bucket as a makeshift sailboat. His phone, which he had left charging on the side table, was floating in a puddle of pool water, ruined. He confronted the children, his voice shaking with a decade of suppressed annoyance. "Get out of my pool right now! You are not allowed here!" Chloe, the 12-year-old, just shrugged, adjusted her goggles, and yelled, "My mom said it's fine, Mr. Vance! It's a heat wave!" That night, Liam didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, looking out at the silent, shimmering water, the source of all his stress. He didn't want a security camera. He didn't want a legal battle. He didn't want to live in a fortified compound. He just wanted peace. The next morning, Liam made a series of brutal, highly expensive phone calls. He called the pool maintenance company. He called a demolition firm. He called the local landscapers. He told them he didn't want a patch job. He wanted a total erasure. "You want us to fill it in?" The foreman, a weathered man named Roy, had asked over the phone, clearly bewildered. "Mr. Vance, it's a new pool. It's pristine." "I want it gone," Liam said, his voice flat. "I want to be able to park my car where it sits right now." Start Monday. And now, it was Monday, 3 days later. The sound of the pump stopped with a shuddering clank. The pool was drained, a vast concrete crater in his backyard, muddy and depressing. Roy walked up, pulling off his headphones. "Well, that's phase 1, Roy said, wiping sweat from his brow. "The fill crew will be here in an hour with the jackhammers and the debris removal." "Are you sure about this, sir? We could still backflush and refill." "I am absolutely sure," Liam said, the finality of the decision feeling strangely liberating, like shedding a heavy cloak. "Start phase 2. The faster we break it up, the faster I get my backyard back." He retreated to the porch, waiting for the real noise to begin. He knew Brenda would find out. He just didn't expect how quickly or how dramatically the confrontation would arrive. At 11:30 a.m., the demolition crew pulled in. The jackhammers attached to a compact excavator were lowered from the truck. The operator revved the engine. The ground began to tremble. Liam was on the phone with his office, trying to finalize a client deal, when the noise began. It wasn't the rhythmic thump of the pump. It was a screeching, tearing, metallic shriek followed by the deafening chud, chud, chud as the steel chisel tore into the concrete shell. It was the sound of money being destroyed, of a luxury being deliberately annihilated. He hung up, wincing. He needed to get inside. He was halfway across the deck when he heard the second distinctly human shriek. It was high-pitched, furious, and piercing, a sound that could only belong to Brenda Jenkins. "What in God's name is going on here, Liam?" Brenda was standing at the edge of his fence, her face crimson, clutching the wooden slats as if they were a lifeline. She was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and a look of complete, unadulterated betrayal. The two younger children were cowering slightly behind her. Liam took a deep breath, walked to the fence, and pulled off his ear protection. The jackhammer noise was overwhelming, making him have to yell. "I am removing my pool, Brenda. I'm having it filled in. It's private property, and I'm exercising my rights." Brenda's eyes darted from Liam to the machine methodically tearing chunks out of the poolside. Her face went slack for a split second, processing the sheer scale of the action, then it contorted into a mask of righteous fury. You are destroying it? Are you insane? The summer is barely starting. My kids rely on that pool. Your children rely on your permission, which you never had, and my patience, which has run out, Liam retorted, stepping closer. This is not a public park, Brenda. It's my house, and now it's going to be a flower bed. No, you can't do this, she screamed, the sound barely audible over the demolition. She snatched her phone from her shorts pocket. I warned you. You think you can ruin my children's summer like this? I'm calling the police. Liam almost laughed. Call them, please. They can arrest me for what exactly? Landscaping? Brenda was already dialing, her voice cracking with performative distress. They're vandalizing the property, the pool. They're destroying a valuable structure. I want this stopped immediately. She slammed the phone shut, pointed a shaking finger at Liam, and hissed, You think this is over, Liam? You just watch. She stormed away, the children trailing her, casting confused, backward glances at the concrete carnage. Liam watched her go, a knot of satisfaction and dread tightening in his stomach. He hadn't expected the drama to end with a threat. He'd expected a tantrum. But calling the police? That was a new level of audacity. Still, he reasoned, the police would arrive, see the pool being lawfully demolished, and leave. It was an absurdity. He told Roy to keep working and went back inside to watch the show from the safety of his living room window. 15 minutes later, the blue and red lights painted the front of his house. 2 patrol cars, not one, were parked on the street. Brenda was standing on the curb, gesticulating wildly toward his property, talking to a tall, imposing officer with a skeptical look. Liam walked out the front door, hands held casually at his sides. Officers? Good morning, Liam said, walking toward them. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm the owner of this property, and I'm simply removing an unwanted amenity. Brenda spun around, her face a terrifying mixture of triumph and absolute unhinged indignation. She cut the officer off mid-sentence. Officer! You see this man? He is lying! He is destroying my neighborhood's property out of pure spite. It is a clear case of malicious destruction. She pointed past him towards the now shattered pool shell. That pool, that beautiful shared asset, was worth over $70,000. And he's having it illegally jackhammered. This is vandalism! The officer, whose name tag read Officer K. Miller, turned from Brenda to Liam, his expression suddenly hardening. He looked past Liam toward the backyard where the heavy machine was still chud-chud-chudding its violent work. Sir, Officer Miller said, his voice flat and authoritative. The caller is alleging destruction of property. We need to see the permit for this demolition, and we need to confirm the legal boundaries of what you're tearing out right now. Liam felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. This wasn't a warning. This was an official inquiry. The irony wasn't just palpable, it was terrifyingly actionable. He had destroyed his $70,000 pool to escape Brenda's harassment, and now Brenda had successfully weaponized the act itself, accusing him of a crime. But, it's my pool, Liam stammered, the words suddenly feeling weak and hollow against the backdrop of police sirens and Brenda's furious glare. "That's what we need to verify, sir," Miller repeated. "And until we do, the work stops." He turned and gestured sharply to the other officer. "Shut down the machinery, now!" The officer jogged toward the backyard. The jackhammer noise abruptly ceased, leaving a ringing, agonizing silence in its wake. The sudden quiet was more shocking than the sound had been. Brenda Jenkins smiled. It was a slow, deliberate, terrifying smile of absolute, karmic victory. Liam, standing on his own property, facing down two pole. The cessation of the jackhammer's assault left the quiet, suburban street ringing with a silence more oppressive than the noise had been. Liam Vance stood rigid on his driveway, the heat of the morning sun a sharp contrast to the cold dread settling in his chest. Brenda Jenkins, still beaming with that predatory, triumphant smile, watched the second officer, a young man with a nervous clipboard, return from the backyard having successfully stopped the demolition crew. Officer Miller, tall and impassive, took a deliberate step toward Liam. "Mr. Vance, I need to see proof of ownership for this address and any permits related to this activity." "It's my house," Liam stated, trying to keep his voice level, though the words felt stiff and unfamiliar in his mouth. "I purchased it outright 10 years ago. Deed is inside. As for the permit, this is a demolition on private property. I'm filling in an amenity on my land. I called a licensed contractor. I didn't think I needed a city permit just to remove my own swimming pool." Brenda stepped forward, her hands now clasped neatly in front of her, the picture of a concerned, wronged citizen. "See, officer?" He didn't think. That's the problem. He acted out of pure, unbridled malice. He's deliberately trying to reduce the value of my property and the entire block. He tore out a structural fixture. "Ma'am, please step back. I'm speaking with the property owner," Miller instructed, his gaze never leaving Liam. He was operating purely on procedure now, his initial skepticism replaced by the need to cover all legal bases thanks to Brenda's dramatic intervention. "Mr. Vance, retrieve your documents. Now." Liam nodded, feeling a primal need to lock eyes with Brenda one last time. Her look was pure malice, a silent promise of prolonged suffering. He turned and walked into the house, his steps heavy on the hardwood floor. Inside, the cool, air-conditioned air did nothing to calm his racing heart. He fumbled in his home office desk, pulling out a disorganized stack of documents. He found the deed, the original pool installation contract, and, crucially, the newly signed demolition agreement with Roy's company, Clean Slate Contractors, LLC, which explicitly detailed the safe removal and fill-in of existing residential swimming pool. As he walked back out, the scene on the lawn had attracted spectators. Mrs. Peterson from across the street was watering her petunias with suspicious slowness, and Mr. Chen from next door was peering over his hedge, pretending to examine his mailbox. Brenda had successfully staged her show. Liam handed the stack to Officer Miller. The officer methodically sifted through the documents. He paused at the demolition contract, his eyebrows arching slightly at the sheer cost of the project. "The pool is undeniably on your parcel," Miller confirmed after a minute, folding the deed. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, based on the documentation, this is the owner of the property, and he has contracted a licensed firm to perform work on his land. While the action is extreme, it is not legally vandalism. He is destroying his own property." Brenda's face, which had been set in stone, seemed to crack. The color drained from her cheeks for a moment. But before panic could set in, her eyes narrowed and a terrifying cold glint appeared. She hadn't come armed with a single accusation. She had brought an entire arsenal. "Wait a minute, officer," Brenda said, her voice dropping from a shriek to a measured, venomous purr. She reached into a large canvas tote bag and pulled out a thick, spiral-bound book. It was the City of Arborcrest Municipal Code, dog-eared and highlighted. "The pool itself is his, yes, but the change to the landscape is not. I checked Chapter 14, Section B, Subparagraph 4, Officer." She flipped the book open with practiced ease, running a perfectly manicured nail down a paragraph. This section states that any significant landscaping change affecting 50% or more of the backyard space, and involving the permanent removal of an installed structural feature over $10,000 in value, requires a specific Community Impact Assessment Permit, CIAP, to ensure neighborhood aesthetic consistency and proper hydrological runoff management. Liam stared at her, dumbfounded. The sheer depth of her preparation, the late-night research, the highlighting of obscure municipal code sections, was horrifying. She hadn't been screaming hysterically. She had been setting a legal trap. Officer Miller took the book, skepticism returning to his face, but he read the highlighted passage slowly. He frowned. "This is a zoning issue, ma'am, not a police matter." "It becomes a police matter when he's operating without the mandated permit." Brenda snapped back, losing her composure slightly. "The city requires the CIAP review before the work commences, specifically to prevent situations like this, unsightly, half-finished construction debris. He is in violation of Municipal Code 14B4. That's a stop work violation, and if he continues, it's a misdemeanor fine per day." Miller pulled out his police radio. "Dispatch, can you patch me through to Arborcrest Planning and Zoning non-emergency line? I need to verify an ordinance, Municipal Code 14B4, concerning significant landscaping changes." Liam felt the reality of the situation crash over him. The vandalism charge was absurd, easily dismissed. But the bureaucratic red tape? That was a fortress. If Brenda had found a loophole, even an obscure, rarely enforced one, she had a legal mechanism to paralyze him after a tense, 3-minute radio silence broken only by the crackle of static and the sound of Brenda breathing triumphantly. Officer Miller lowered the device. His face was grim. "Mr. Vance," he said, handing Brenda her codebook back. "The city planning office confirms the ordinance is valid. They don't enforce it, but they confirm the requirement for a CIAP permit for work of this scope." He pulled a pad from his vest and began scribbling. "Under Arborcrest Ordinance 41-7, the city authorizes the police to issue an immediate, temporary stop work order pending formal review by the Planning and Zoning Department when unauthorized significant structural or landscaping changes are underway." He ripped the sheet off the pad. It was an official stop work order. "The work is halted immediately, Mr. Vance," Miller said, handing him the paper. "You are not to proceed with the pool demolition, fill-in, or debris removal until this permit issue is resolved. You can be fined and your equipment impounded if you violate this order." Liam held the flimsy paper, feeling the weight of the $70,000 hole now officially residing in his backyard. It wasn't just a physical crater. It was a legal trap. Roy, the foreman, walked back up to the fence line, looking confused. Liam walked over to him, the stop work order shaking in his hand. "Roy, they issued a stop work order," Liam whispered, the full irony of the situation burning in his throat. "I need you to pull the crew out." "Pull out? With a 50-foot concrete shell half shattered? Mr. Vance, the whole thing will collapse and turn into a mud bog if we get a heavy rain." Roy protested, bewildered. "I know. Just pull out." "Now," Liam insisted, gesturing urgently. Brenda watched the crew pack up the massive equipment, the noise of the trucks loading up providing a soundtrack to her victory. She adjusted her sun hat, her demeanor shifting back to saccharine sweetness as she addressed the still-watching neighbors. "Just terrible what some people will do out of sheer pettiness, isn't it?" she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Destroying a valuable neighborhood feature just because one doesn't like sharing. Now we all have to deal with a big, ugly hole in the ground until the city figures out how to fix this mess." She turned to Liam, who was standing alone, surrounded by police and debris. Officer Miller was already walking back to his cruiser. The misunderstanding resolved, the new problem created. Brenda leaned toward Liam, her voice dropping to an intimate, chilling whisper that was far worse than any scream. "You wanted peace, Liam? You wanted this to be over? It's not over. Now you have a $70,000 fine ticking up daily, and an eyesore that all the neighbors will see. And my children? They're going to use the front lawn of your construction zone to play catch all summer long." She patted his arm, the gesture oozing false sympathy. "I guess we're stuck with that hole for a while. Have a wonderful day." As Brenda sauntered back down the street, waving brightly at Mrs. Peterson, Liam looked back at his house. The demolition machine was gone, replaced by a half-shattered, muddy chasm an open wound in his lawn, legally quarantined by the city, all thanks to one woman's spite and a perfectly deployed, obscure bylaw. The irony was devastating. His expensive move to end the conflict had not only failed, but had provided Brenda with the ultimate weapon to escalate the war. He was trapped. The stop work order felt less like a government document and more like a personal decree from Brenda Jenkins. It sat on Liam's kitchen counter next to his forgotten morning coffee, a flimsy piece of paper holding hostage a massive, half-destroyed piece of his property. The silence left by the departed jackhammer was heavy, filling the air with the stale smell of wet concrete and legal defeat. Liam's first call was to his corporate lawyer, Mark, who specialized in financial regulatory defense, not zoning disputes. Mark, I need you to look at a municipal code, Chapter 14, Section B, Subparagraph 4, Arbor Crest. Mark, whose voice always sounded like expensive silk, paused. Liam, you're calling me about zoning? Did you build a 20-story condo on your lot? Liam recounted the story with clipped precision. The years of abuse, the decision to demolish, the absurd vandalism claim, and the devastating counterpunch of the Community Impact Assessment Permit, CIAP. This Brenda, Mark drawled. A low whistle on the other end. She did her homework. Look, the CIAP is typically for new structural additions that increase water usage or runoff, not removing an existing one. But the wording, permanent removal of an installed structural feature over $10,000 in value, is broad enough to stick. It's designed to prevent developers from hastily tearing down historic houses, but she's weaponized it against a swimming pool. What does it take to get the order lifted? Liam pressed, pacing his kitchen tiles. You have to file the CIAP application, which mandates public notification, a 15-day comment period for neighbors, and a review by the zoning board, Mark explained. Best case scenario, it's 30 days. Worst case, if Brenda files a well-written, supported objection, and I guarantee she will, it could be months. And those daily fines she mentioned? They start stacking up the minute the order was issued. How high? A misdemeanor fine can start at a couple $100s a day, then escalate. This is an open hazard. If a kid falls in, the liability is astronomical. You need to expedite this, Liam. Get to the planning. And zoning office now, Liam put on a suit, a psychological armor for the bureaucratic war he was about to wage, and drove immediately to the Arbor Crest City Hall. The planning and zoning department was a fluorescent-lit purgatory. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the quiet despair of citizens trying to wrestle with municipal definitions. Liam took a number and waited 45 minutes before the LED sign finally flashed V14. He sat across from a woman named Doris, whose gray hair was pulled into a tight bun and whose expression suggested she had personally invented the phrase, "slow down." Liam explained his situation calmly, presenting the stop work order and requesting the CIAP application package. Doris adjusted her reading glasses, looking not at him but over his shoulder. CIAP? Form 11B. That requires a full hydrological survey and an environmental impact report from a certified engineer, Mr. Vance, and 3 signed neighbor letters of no objection. She slid a packet of dense, small-print forms across the desk. The zoning board only meets the second Tuesday of the month. Today is Monday. You missed the window for this month. The next meeting is in 5 weeks. 5 weeks? I have an open hazard in my yard and daily fines accumulating. Liam's voice rose, attracting the attention of 2 men discussing a retaining wall permit nearby. Doris didn't flinch. She picked up a staple remover and began meticulously separating 2 sheets of paper that had clearly been stapled for decades. Sir, the process is the process. You should have applied before the work commenced. If you want to accelerate the review, you'll need to schedule an emergency petition hearing, but those slots are reserved for infrastructure failures. You removing a swimming pool is not an emergency. An adjacent property owner filed a complaint. She is strategically slowing down my process, Liam argued, leaning across the desk, trying to convey the absurdity of the situation. Doris finally met his eyes, a look of profound boredom settling over her features. I have no knowledge of the motivations of your neighbors, Mr. Vance. I only process the paperwork. The packet is $50, cash only. Liam left the office 3 hours later, the $50 lighter, the stack of forms heavier, and the reality of his predicament sinking in like a stone. He was facing a minimum of 35 days of fines and an open construction site, all because of Brenda's meticulous spite. The psychological warfare began immediately upon his return home. He found a bright yellow, plastic children's barrier, the kind used for temporary construction, propped up against the front of his mailbox. Attached was a handwritten note on pink paper in neat cursive, "Safety first. Protect the neighborhood from your spite hole. P.S. The kids are enjoying the extra play space." Liam balled up the paper, his hands trembling. He had tried to buy peace with $70,000, and Brenda had used the receipt as kindling to light a fire under his life. He walked into his backyard, looking down into the muddy, half-demolished concrete shell. It was no longer a pool. It was a scar. He realized then that fighting Brenda on the field she chose, politeness, municipal codes, and neighborly conduct, was a losing game. He had to pivot. He had to hit her where the CI app didn't matter. Liam worked late into the night, fueled by cold Chinese takeout and rising fury. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was a financial analyst. He understood leverage, risk, and, most importantly, databases. He was well-versed in performing deep due diligence on people and assets. He didn't call Mark back. He called a discreet associate in his firm's high-level risk assessment department, a woman named Vanessa who specialized in asset tracing and credit profiling. "Vanessa, I need a deep dive on an individual. Full financial, property, and civil litigation history. I need to know her tax profile, her mortgages, any liens, her credit score, everything. A client profile, Liam?" Vanessa asked, her voice crackling with late-night exhaustion. "No, a personal project. I need to find the pressure point on a highly aggressive competitor." He gave her the name and address. "Brenda Jenkins, 142 Willow Lane. That's going to run you. And it's not exactly above board," Vanessa warned. "Invoice it under external vendor due diligence. Put a rush on it. I need the report by tomorrow morning. Whatever the cost, it's worth it." The next morning, Liam woke before the sun. He didn't bother checking his email for the CI app forms. His focus was singular. At 7:45 a.m., Vanessa's encrypted email landed in his inbox. The subject line was simply, "Jenkins, B data set complete." Liam opened the file. It was a dense 40-page report filled with property transfer dates, tax assessments, and loan schedules. He scanned the first few pages, noting her inflated home value estimate and her 2 massive refinances. Aggressive leverage. Nothing illegal, he thought. He scrolled down, past the credit card debt and the public service records, until he reached the property and utility assessment section. He paused. A single highlighted line made the cold air leave his lungs in a sharp gasp. In Willow Lane, Brenda Jenkins. Lot size, 8,700 SQFT. Existing structural features, single-family residence, detached garage, in-ground saltwater pool, installed 2018. Liam stared at the words. In-ground saltwater pool, installed 2018. He knew Brenda didn't have a pool. He knew her children used his because they didn't have one. He had stood 3 houses down, watching her kids trespass for 2 years. He read the detail again. The date, 2018, was 4 years after he installed his own. He scrolled back, reading the accompanying notes. Utility assessment. Water usage spike noted in Q3 2018 corresponding with structural modification. Building permit, 88P 2018 issued for installation of a residential in-ground swimming pool. Liam slammed his hand down on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent house. It wasn't possible. She didn't have a pool. Why would she be forcing her kids to trespass on his property if she had her own? He grabbed his keys and raced to his car. He drove 3 houses down, pulled over near Brenda's mailbox, and walked quickly up her driveway, past her neatly manicured rose bushes. He ignored the front door and walked directly to the high, lattice-topped fence that enclosed her backyard. He found the single, slightly loose knot in the lattice, the one he had seen the kids use to peer into his yard. He pulled himself up, gripped the lattice, and looked over the fence into Brenda Jenkins's backyard. The yard was immaculate. A small, expensive-looking gazebo stood over an outdoor kitchen. There was a lush lawn and a tire swing, but right where the property line drawings and the tax assessment said a pool should be, a vast, concrete rectangle, approximately 20 feet by 40 feet, with a beautiful stone coping. There was only a meticulously maintained dog park. The entire pool shell had been perfectly filled in, leveled and covered with topsoil and sod. The only remnant was the pristine stone coping that now ringed an elaborate, fenced-in area complete with agility equipment and two perfectly content golden retrievers sleeping in the sun. He stared. The irony so profound it was almost dizzying. Brenda had removed her pool years ago. She had gotten rid of her $70,000 investment to create a dog park. Then, the true horror of the realization hit him. Brenda had demolished her pool, meaning she must have gone through the exact CIAP process she was now using to trap him. She hadn't just studied the municipal code. She had lived it. She had the permits. She had the timeline. She knew exactly how long it would take, exactly where the loopholes were, and exactly how to use the bureaucratic machine to strangle his pee. The neighborhood of Willow Lane was usually silent after 11 p.m., the soundscape dominated only by crickets and the low hum of central air conditioning units. Tonight, that peace was violently ripped apart. At 12:07 a.m., a heavy-duty flatbed carrying the compact excavator rumbled quietly down Liam's driveway. Liam met Roy, the foreman, at the curb. Roy was a practical man who disliked trouble, but Liam had paid him a truly exorbitant, off-the-books cash bonus to come back under the cloak of darkness and perform this delicate high-risk maneuver. "Look, Mr. Vance, I'm doing this because you're paying me 3 times the hazard rate," Roy muttered, his voice hoarse. "But if we scrape that fence line or if a neighbor calls the cops, I'm gone. That stop work order is about demolition but moving construction debris outside of daylight hours? That's asking for a full city investigation. We're not demolishing anything. We're relocating hazardous material on my property to a designated temporary staging area," Liam stated, his eyes cold and focused. He was dressed in dark clothes, operating with the clinical detachment of a surgical assassin. "The order doesn't forbid internal movement of debris. Just keep the bucket 2 feet away from the fence and do not drop anything on her side. We are building a wall." They worked in the pitch black, illuminated only by the powerful floodlights Liam had quickly installed on his garage earlier that afternoon, angled sharply down into the backyard crater. The operation was slow, agonizingly loud, and profoundly physical. The excavator's metal treads chewed into the grass near the muddy hole. The massive steel claw reached into the crater and clamped down on the first piece of shattered concrete, a jagged, curved shard that looked like the ribcage of a destroyed titan. The machine lifted it, dripping with sludge and dirt, and swung it high over the yard. Clang! The piece landed with a deafening crash 2 feet from the perimeter of Brenda Jenkins's backyard fence. For the next hour and a half, the process repeated. Lift, swing, drop, crash. Each slam of concrete against concrete was a punctuation mark of pure spite. Liam directed Roy with hand signals, obsessively checking the distance from the fence line with a flashlight. He wanted the pile to be maximal, grotesque, and unmistakable. The concrete pieces, thick, rebar-reinforced chunks of what was once a $70,000 status symbol, were stacked into a towering, unstable monument. The curved, blue-tiled coping stones were placed prominently on the top, like an ironic crown. When the sun began to hint at light on the horizon, the demolition crew packed up and vanished as silently as they came, leaving behind a battlefield monument. Liam stood on his porch, looking at the result. The pile was truly magnificent in its ugliness. It was nearly 8 feet high and stretched for 30 feet along the length of his property line, bordering Brenda's immaculate dog park. It was a jagged, muddy, hazardous wall of debris, a clear sign that the neighborhood conflict had moved into a darker, more primitive phase. It was pure, distilled hostility, legally compliant, yet entirely indefensible aesthetically. He knew what was coming. He set his phone on his coffee table, recording video and audio, and poured a cup of coffee. He was ready for the explosion. It came at 7:15 a.m. Liam was sitting in his living room, calmly reading the Wall Street Journal, when the shriek started. It was worse than the sound he'd heard yesterday. It was a raw, primal cry of absolute horror and disbelief. Brenda, still in a satin robe, ran out of her back door and skidded to a stop right in front of her meticulously maintained dog park. She stared up at the sheer, brutal height of the debris wall towering over her yard. The morning sun caught the wet mud, making the shattered rebar glint menacingly. The shadow of the massive, ugly stack fell directly over her prized gazebo and perfectly manicured lawn. "Liam! Liam, you monster!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with genuine terror and rage. Liam slowly walked out onto his screened porch, sipping his coffee. Brenda rushed to their shared fence, clawing at the lattice. "What is this? What have you done? You've dumped toxic waste on my property line. You violated the stop work order." "Good morning, Brenda," Liam said calmly, holding up his coffee cup in a mocking salute. "Hardly toxic. Just recycled aggregate and rebar from the pool I legally purchased and legally owned. As you know, the stop work order prohibits demolition, fill-in, or debris removal from the site. It does not prohibit relocation of debris already present on my property to a temporary storage area on my property." "Temporary storage? This is an eyesore! This is a health hazard! My dogs can't even go out there. This is a clear case of illegal encroachment. I am calling the city! You are going to jail for this!" Brenda's face was blotchy, tears of rage tracking down her cheeks. The composure she had maintained for years had shattered. She whipped out her phone and started screaming into it, not at the police this time, but at the planning and zoning department, demanding to speak to Doris or anyone higher. The entire neighborhood was watching. Mr. Chen was on his roof, inexplicably fiddling with an antenna, getting the best view. Mrs. Peterson was already dialing numbers, presumably to every neighborhood association and gossip chain in Arbor Crest. 10 minutes later, the single unmarked city vehicle arrived. It wasn't the police, but an official from the Planning and Zoning Compliance Department, a harried, thin man in a polyester suit named Mr. Hayes, clearly dispatched by a panicked Doris. Mr. Hayes walked stiffly into Liam's backyard, staring up at the debris wall like it was a modern art piece dedicated to pure spite. "Mr. Vance, this is unacceptable," Mr. Hayes declared, pulling out a clipboard. "This is a clear violation of aesthetic guidelines and constitutes a failure to secure a hazardous construction site. The stop work order is still in effect. Mr. Hayes, please consult the order," Liam interjected smoothly, handing him a clean printout of the order and the city's definition of construction debris relocation. "I have ceased demolition. I have not filled in the hole. I have simply organized the construction debris, which, by definition, is any material, including concrete, resulting from construction or demolition. I have relocated it to a temporary staging area 2 feet from my fence line, entirely on my property, to mitigate the hazard of the open hole. It's a 25-foot-long wall of jagged concrete next to a fence." Hayes sputtered, adjusting his glasses. Brenda, who had followed Hayes onto Liam's property, jumped in, seizing the opportunity. "He's right! And look at the property line. It's encroaching. That pile is tilting. It's going to fall into my yard. This is a clear property line trespass, officer." Mr. Hayes sighed, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. He pulled out a laser measure, walked to the fence, and meticulously measured the distance from the property marker to the base of the pile. He checked the reading. He checked it again. He looked at Brenda, whose face was pale with anticipation. "Ma'am, the pile is precisely 2 feet and 3 inches from the property line. It is legally on Mr. Vance's land. Furthermore, Mr. Vance's technical interpretation of the stop work order is narrowly correct. He hasn't proceeded with the prohibited work. He has only moved existing debris." Mr. Hayes rubbed his temples. "This is a violation of common decency, Mr. Vance, but not technically a violation of the stop work order, nor is it a measurable encroachment." Brenda's knees looked like they might buckle. The official refusal to cite Liam for the debris wall, the ultimate act of spite she thought would land him in jail, was a massive public defeat. Liam smiled, a genuine cold smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I've expedited my CIAP application, which you now have. I'd appreciate the same efficiency on the review. As Mr. Hayes made a hasty retreat, Brenda stood frozen next to the fence. The triumphant light had gone out of her eyes, replaced by a calculating, dangerous flatness. She did not scream. She did not cry. She took a single, deliberate breath, and her voice, now low and calm, was colder than the midnight air. You won this round, Liam. The debris. Very clever. But you keep talking about your $70,000 pool and your privacy. You forget that in 2019, I didn't just remove my pool. I filed a civil suit against the previous owner of your house. Liam's smile vanished. What are you talking about? The previous owner, a nice older couple, sold the house to you, Mr. Vance. They were forced to sell quickly because they had a major, undisclosed structural defect, Brenda whispered, leaning close to the fence so only he could hear, her eyes glittering with dark knowledge. That beautiful saltwater pool you just tore out? It was leaking for 2 years, and not just into the ground. It was slowly, quietly undermining the foundation of your garage, just 5 feet away. She paused, letting the information land like a punch to the gut. I won that suit. Liam, the previous owners paid me a settlement for the damage to my drainage. But what they didn't pay for was the repair to the foundation they sold you the house with. I have all the engineering reports. That's why you're getting fines, Liam. I'm not after your backyard. I'm after your house. And those daily fines? They're the least of your worries. Congratulations on moving the debris. Now you have a perfectly positioned pile of weight right next to the most compromised section of your foundation.